Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? Seems like a good day. It is Tuesday, September 24th, 2019. Mark the date on your calendar. Fireworks tonight. Lots happening here in this country and around the world. Should be very interesting to track events today. There's a lot to talk about, not only just in terms of news, but we'll have to analyze everything. But I think it's all coming to a head today. So it's a good day to join in. And I don't know. Well, I mean, it might be so momentous a day that I'm certainly going to be taking some input here from Greg in the background. He's excited about what's going on. Lots happening today. The dam seems to be breaking in terms of the numbers of House Democrats coming out in favor of, well, take your pick, impeachment, opening an impeachment inquiry, officially beginning some sort of impeachment proceedings, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, we probably need to do some organization and some categorization about that at this point. But it's starting to look like things will change. And quite honestly, I can't remember exactly how we put it over the last couple of days, weeks, months, years, for that matter. But I feel like we've done a fairly good job in preparing you for what was coming up today. Or not that we knew it was coming today, but of course the fact that it's happening at all. And Nancy Pelosi also probably at this point beginning to reevaluate where she will stand in all this. But I think it has kind of been our conclusion all along, while we were upset with her foot dragging and thought that she was really being put in an untenable position. We still held out the possibility that she would simply have to. I mean, the political science tells you she simply has to move if her entire caucus moves. We're not there yet with the entire caucus, but the critical mass moment was passed a long time ago. And now we're looking for, just like we do in social media, influencers and thought leaders to begin moving towards impeachment. In other words, in this situation, I guess we're talking about Pelosi allies that would leave her entirely isolated if the reality of it was that she was, let's say, intractably opposed to impeachment as a concept, on principle. It would probably make no difference. But with the rest of her caucus and her close allies beginning to move, it's becoming, I think, apparent that the strategy was, in fact, that she was going to wait for, or she was going to be fighting a rearguard action, allowing the rest of the caucus, if they needed to move to where they felt they had to be on the question, and then she would be willing to take the rearguard fire and then say, all right, I've been moved to it by this critical mass of the Democratic caucus. And I believe that's what we're seeing happen today, although there is a nascent movement out there, interestingly enough, among the analysts to deny that this is happening because of any public input or public pressure, which is also sort of an interesting twist to take on things. But so momentous an occasion is it, and not only here in the United States, but also in Britain, thanks to the ruling of the British Supreme Court, that we have a special edition of the show today. It's Tuesday, and Greg Dworkin is here. You couldn't sit this one out, and I'm glad you're not. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. I'm here to bring order to everything. Parliament will sit tomorrow. Excellent. John Bercow has already announced, yes, we're sitting tomorrow.
Right. You can't indict a sitting parliament. You know about that.
Right. So what happened is that the British Supreme Court unanimously, 11 judges ruled.
11? That's a good idea.
That the court, the prorogation is null and void. Mm-hmm. Parliament has not been suspended.
Well, do you get paid for those vacation days, or
I don't know that. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, or at least current temporary Prime Minister Boris Johnson, says he will respect the decision, and the important issue is to get on with it and deliver Brexit. Now, remember, the whole thing is that he claimed in lying to the Queen, that this had nothing to do with Brexit. It simply was the usual, perhaps a bit early, perhaps a bit long, summer vacation for Parliament so they can move on to the next session.
And
so after the British Supreme Court said, no, actually what happened is that this was all about Brexit and you were trying to stifle Parliament and you lied to the Queen about it. Mm-hmm. Now the Tory MPs and the Prime Minister are saying, no, this is all about frustrating Brexit, when their entire argument was that the prorogation was not about Brexit, says Ian Dunt. It's pure, undistilled, triple strength, stick it in your veins, doublethink. It's a crime against logic is what it is. What goes on in their brains, I wonder? Do they keep the various compartments so heavily separated that they don't even realize how unsustainable the argument it is? Or are they so cynical that they just don't care? So speaking of cynical, my favorite tweet about the whole thing was from one Nigel Farage. You may have heard of him.
Yes.
He actually runs at the moment the Brexit Party and was Boris Johnson's staunch ally. And he tweets, the calling of a Queen's speech and prorogation is the worst political decision ever.
Okay.
Dominic Cummings must go. That's Boris Johnson's Stephen Miller.
Huh. All right.
And, of course, it's already had 1,000 retweets and 4,000 likes, but 2,000 comments. And a lot of the comments are very upset with Nigel because, the first comment, for example, this is an attack on Brexit and a ruling to stop Brexit. I will not support you or the Brexit Party anymore if you turn against the only people who have any chance of delivering it. I'm disappointed in you. We must stick together. So the thing I love about British politics, let's say, unlike American politics or Israeli politics, and that one we'll hear more about tomorrow because tomorrow is when President Rivlin will decide how the government's going to be formed. But the thing about it is that British politics is entirely selfless and, all about what's good for the country, party over ambition. Mm-hmm. So without ambition and without any self-awareness whatsoever, Nigel Farage is really demonstrating what's really going on here.
Interesting. I mean,
at two, Nigel?
Yeah, although, it may have been that he wanted to, I don't know. I wonder whether he agreed with it at the time or whether he really wanted to spend 5 weeks demagoguing Brexit. But
he's the Brexit Party. He thought this would help get to Brexit. He thought it was a great idea until it wasn't a great idea.
All right. I mean, you would think, but all right, I'm fine with him dividing the troops. So out with Nigel. I'm okay with that, too.
Anyway, the decision was read out by Lady Hale, the president of the Supreme Court. I guess they don't have a marshal of the Supreme Court, so the president of the Supreme Court had to do it. Right. Unusually, none of the parties were provided with advance copies. Only 7 of the 11 justices who heard the case were present in court. It was very early in the morning, I suppose. The first legal question the judges had to resolve was whether the Prime Minister's decision exploiting residual royal prerogative powers was justiciable and could consequently be subjected to scrutiny by the courts.
It's a standing question.
It's a standing question,
friends of the American Supreme Court, yes.
The English High Court declined to intervene. The Scottish Appeal Court concluded the judges did have legal authority to act. In a unanimous verdict, the court ruled Johnson's decision to prorogue could be examined by judges, overturning the ruling of the High Court in London. Delivering judgment, Hale said, the question arises in circumstances which have never arisen before and are likely to arise again if you dodgy politicians listen to what we're trying to tell you here. No, I just added that last part. Then giving the court's judgment on whether the decision to suspend Parliament was legal, Hale said, this court has concluded that the Prime Minister's advice to Her Majesty was unlawful, void, and of no effect. This means that the order in council to which it led was also unlawful, void, and of no effect, and should be quashed. This means that when the royal commissioners walked into the House of Lords to prorogue Parliament, it was as if they walked in with a blank sheet of paper. It's the old David Waldman, show me that law actually exists.
Show me the paperwork.
Exactly. The prorogation was also void and of no effect. Parliament has not been prorogued. It is for Parliament, and in particular the Speaker, that's John Bercow, of course.
Right.
Order.
Is he still?
And the Lord Speaker to decide what to do next, unless there is some parliamentary rule of which we are unaware They can take immediate steps to enable each house to meet as soon as possible. It is not clear to us any step is needed from the Prime Minister, but if it is, the court is pleased that his counsel have told the court he will take all necessary steps to comply with the terms of any declaration made by this court.
Well,
The court, she added, the court is bound to conclude, therefore, the decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification. In other words, Parliament is supreme and you lied to the Queen. Which is pretty much
good.
what we told our Kagro in the Morning audience.
I think we
What's
did a
going
good
on
job
here?
with that. All right, I should say I sat here and said, "Wow, well, you did a good job with it." I thought, I feel like people were prepared for that, as insofar as we can be prepared for anything in British politics, anyway.
Thank you, Ian Dunt, who is
yeah.
a really great follow if you want to follow British politics.
And I guess to put a finer point on it, it was really a close, I guess, cousin of the standing issue. It's a justiciability issue, but like I said, they're, I think, close cousins. Not only a question of are judges qualified to even answer this question, but who's even able to bring this question to us for us to decide that we can't answer it, which would be the standing side of things.
Right.
But
so here's some of the reaction. The Wales First Minister calls for Prime Minister to resign. Boris Johnson should resign after the Supreme Court found a suspension of Parliament as unlawful. First Minister Mark Drakeford says the PM tried to play fast and loose with our Constitution. The unanimous decision by the Supreme Court is a huge victory for the rule of law. For some reason, they didn't capitalize that, but they should have. I capitalized it even when I speak it out loud.
Either.
Parliament was never prorogued and must now hold this government to account. Any normal prime minister would, as a matter of honor, tender their resignation after such a unanimous verdict from the UK highest court. It is the final straw in a pitiful episode. And there you go. So
yeah, I don't know that he'll hold to that, of course, but yeah, any other prime minister would just be, I'm done. Bye.
And this is BBC. Where does defeat leave Boris Johnson before everything gets swept up in a Force 10 political storm? Stop for a moment to think about what just happened. The highest court in the land has just ruled that the serving prime minister broke the law. He gave the Queen advice that was unlawful. He lied to the Queen. Therefore, his decision to suspend Parliament was also against the law, so is now null and void. Short of the inscrutable Lady Hale, with the giant diamond spider on her lapel,
a lot of people
declaring Boris Johnson to be Pinocchio, this judgment is just about as bad for the government as it gets. That's the BBC.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, minus I don't know, what do you think, maybe about 200 or 300 years here, Boris Johnson gets beheaded.
Right. And so she points out a crucial point, which is going to be reflected in what's going on in the United States. There is a difference between being ruthless and reckless. And the scope and strength of his judgment, this judgment, cannot just be dismissed as some pesky judges sticking their noses in. Oh, those pesky people in Congress asking to be involved in an impeachment inquiry. Just a few weeks ago, the advice of government lawyers was said to be that it was unlikely the judges would want to step in. They were wrong. For the very many people in the Conservative Party who have doubts about Boris Johnson but wanted to give him a chance, this is a nightmare. Okay?
Yes.
So, in the 2 months in power, Boris Johnson has lost his first 6 Commons votes, broken the law by suspending Parliament, and misled the monarch. Even for a politician who seems to enjoy breaking the rules, this is a serious charge at only 2 months in office. Even the most brazen Johnson backer cannot simply shrug off. So these sorts of things do have consequences. And that, of course, brings us back to the United States. There's 2 ways, at least, of many ways, to look at what's going on with the slow tide of impeachment building. We talked about this. It has its own rhythm. It has its own tide. You can't hurry it along, but now is the time. So, we're watching individuals one by one after this whole mess with what happened with Ukraine. And actually, Angie Craig, Minnesota, who's one of the early okay, I'm ready Congress people yesterday.
The early late people.
David Perry, who is a historian and journalist, sums it up this way. Happy to hear local Congresswoman Angie Craig, Minnesota, position her support for impeachment hearings as the need to have an impartial investigation and discover whether the president put his personal political gain ahead of national security. Nice little tweet that kind of summarizes what's going on here. I don't know that we need to repeat the whole situation that got us here, but the fact of the matter is that it sure looks like Donald Trump was pressuring Ukraine to open up a bogus inquiry into Joe Biden, and this is the president working with another country for his own personal gain.
Yes.
And that's the important part of this. So let me just give you a reaction. You were talking about movers and shakers and pundits, and you were talking about it in terms of in Congress, who are the important people. We'll get to that. But this Noah Rothman, conservative political pundit, crossed my transom this morning. He says, when the impeachment drive was based not on an act of conspiracy with Russia or the obstruction of justice, but the attempted obstruction of justice, the politics clearly cut in Trump's favor. The circumstances have changed dramatically, and so should your analysis. The funny thing is his won't, but, the advice is yours should.
And by the way, it shouldn't.
Of course not. But basically what's going to happen, I was watching Morning Joe this morning to see the reaction, and Scarborough was reading a concept about how trying to impeach Trump is just going to drive Republicans to support him.
Okay.
And making the case that, look, the problem is if you nominate Elizabeth Warren, they would rather go with the sociopath over the socialist.
Okay.
And David Leonhardt was listening to all of this in the New York Times columnist, chuckling, and said, look, they're just going to find an excuse to vote for him. This is nonsense. These are the same people that are supporting him all this time. That makes no sense whatsoever. But what is interesting is to come up with the rationale behind, okay, this is why I have to keep supporting him. It's not that I'm afraid of him. It's not that I want everything that he's doing. It's not that I fear, if I'm a congressman, a primary. It's that Elizabeth Warren maybe do it. And it's just fascinating to watch.
Yes. Well, this is it's been a slow. Well, I don't know. They've been saying it for a long time. I mean, I'm becoming a Nazi because of you calling me a Nazi.
Exactly.
Yeah, So it's a different.
Michigan State political scientist Matt Grossman. That's with two N's.
Okay.
Shift on impeachment potential came from was a Matt Grossman with one N, who is a political analyst and
I'm sorry.
They're both very insightful.
Okay.
But this is the 2N Grossman. Shift on impeachment potential came from swing state Dems and national security establishment evaluating evidence directly rather than public opinion or activist pressure. Exactly the point you were making. And, who are those people? This is when we get to highlight, you ready? Abigail Spanberger.
I knew it.
You knew it. Dominic Montanaro from NPR says, here's how Trump did in the impeachment 7 op-ed writers, because the 7 of them wrote an op-ed that appeared in the Washington Post last night almost magically.
Ta-da.
Ready to go. Spanberger, Virginia 7, Trump plus 7 district. Slotkin, Michigan 8, Trump plus 7 district. Luria, Virginia 2. Virginia 2 was special because Scott Taylor, the guy who was in there, besides we love Virginians, but Scott Taylor, the guy, was just odious. That's a Trump plus 4 district, Virginia Beach area. Mikey Sherrill from New Jersey.
Yes.
Trump plus 1. Cisneros from California. Clinton plus 9. Crow, Colorado. Clinton plus 9. And Houlihan, Pennsylvania. Clinton plus 10. It's more like if you look at the PVIs, the Cook Partisan Voter Index, Houlihan, Pennsylvania 6 is more like a R plus 6. But it all makes the point that more like a D plus 6. It's not that Democratic.
Oh, I see. Okay.
R plus 6 is Spanberger's district. So Spanberger had the most Republican of the districts. And the point that Dominic was making, which is true, is that this averages to be about a Clinton plus 1 between the 7. And these are not overwhelmingly Clinton districts. So it really is, swing districts
Yes.
that wound up leading us. And, of course, that's why they were highlighted. So who did all the highlighting? As I tweeted this morning, a slow rollout of Democrats keeping the impeachment stuff in the news and making it seem like there's a tide flowing. Who could have orchestrated that?
Oh, that's a good question.
Right? And so the best part of this are going to be all the stories about how Nancy Pelosi was forced into this. Like she had nothing to do with it. My commenters are saying, of course, we tried to avoid this very divisive and serious action, but the president made it unavoidable. And everybody knows this wasn't my first choice. But, you got to do what you got to do. So there's all these stories today about how is Nancy Pelosi going to wrestle with the fact that a rebellion is happening and Democrats are in disarray.
Well, I think we've had some idea about that.
Should we tell them?
No.
No. Okay.
Not now. Let's have done it already. How about that?
Here's a hint, okay?
Yes.
Nancy Pelosi might have been responsible for some of this.
That's a good point. I mean, it's certainly possible, and it was certainly what we were hoping for. Although I think, like everything, it's sort of a mixed bag of, I was really hoping for not getting here, but if we were going to get here, this is how we ought to do it, and we ought to sort of slow roll it, although I think she might have preferred even slower. But it goes both ways.
Here's my point, okay?
Yes.
She probably didn't want to do this until last week.
That may
then
be
the
true.
whistleblower thing happens.
Yes.
And it's so egregious. I mean, it really is bad. And she says, okay, I don't want to do this, but if we're going to do this, now is the time. Let's orchestrate how this is going to happen. At least let's be ready. And then more comes out. And then it turns out it's Ukraine. And then it turns out actually the public can understand what's going on here. This one's pretty simple. And she says, okay, boom. This is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, yesterday
and then it gets orchestrated. And then all of a sudden this magical Washington Post thing appears. And all of a sudden, one by one, starting yesterday morning, I'm for it now. And it happened all day. It'll happen all day today. This afternoon, I think she meets with the caucus to, quote, decide what to do. It's being portrayed as her taking the temperature of the caucus. Nothing happens in the House unless Pelosi wants it.
Right. And also, when she doesn't want it, it doesn't happen. And
I know, but when she does, look at what's going on.
Yes.
That's my point.
No, that's okay. It's the same. I think it's the flip side of the same point. It won't happen if she doesn't want it.
We've been saying that. We've been seeing if she doesn't want it to happen, it's not happening. We've seen that all along. This is what happens when the switch is flipped.
Yeah. And I think probably the best, clearest, easiest to grasp, or at least for me anyway, example of it is, all right, if it is going to happen, and here's I guess the big question really for political scientists in the years to come is, okay, how did we get to, all right, if it's going to happen? But she then says, if it's going to happen, then my suggestion is the dam needs to break this way. And she may very well have handpicked the 7. She may very well just have met with them and said, well, we are 7 in number, and we've been talking to one another. It might not have been her coordination to put them together, but then to say, look, my suggestion would be you all drop it at once as a united front, laying it out as a national security problem. That's what you're known for. They were billed in the op-ed as national security Democrats, which is a weird designation, but this is how they hold themselves out. So it may very well have been either her or her press office saying, let us help you roll this out in a way that moves the ball forward unequivocally. If it's going to happen, it's got to happen, forcefully. Now, It won't help me to have you two this afternoon, you 2 weeks from now,
exactly. And in fact, the 7 with the mysterious that suddenly appeared op-ed in the Washington Post happened last night. But the rollout started yesterday morning. It started with Dean Phillips, and then it was Angie Craig. This happened in the morning. And then all of a sudden, the Hill reporters, almost as one, started tweeting, the dam is breaking.
Yeah, there were an awful lot.
They saw what was going on. And then throughout the day, this one, then that one, then this one, culminating last night with the 7. So they weren't put on point to go first. They were actually put on point to underline.
Yes. Well, I think it was. It seems to be working, and people will. We have some interviews to do to figure out who did what. It won't be us. It will be the newspaper people.
I almost forgot because you brought up this very important point at the very beginning of the show.
Oh, well, that's very important.
It was the one that caught my eye.
Yeah.
Was about, I don't know, I'm guessing, I don't quite remember because, one day is like 7 years in dog life, But somewhere around 11:30, 12 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday,
Yes.
Rosa DeLauro,
Oh, yeah.
incredibly close to Pelosi.
Oh,
no
yes.
way she talks without Pelosi saying it's okay.
Yeah.
That was the signal that, okay, this is real. John Larson and Rosa DeLauro, within an hour of each other, said, nope, it's time.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing because, Rosa DeLauro individually, speaking to her not as a congressperson, but just having lunch with her, she'd be like, oh, yeah, we got to impeach this idiot at some point. But, I have business here. This is the House of Representatives. I'm close to the Speaker. I'm safe in my own seat, so I don't feel like I need to come out and say everything. And probably all constituents knew, well, we know where Rosa is, really. But I have a job to do. So she waited until it was A-okay to go ahead, and then she said, guess what? I'm for that thing you all kind of figured that I was for because you've known me for 35 years.
Right.
Interesting.
Now, I'll see if I could. Oh, yes, I can find it because I set it aside. I
okay.
also mentioned John Larson.
Yes.
John Larson is a neutral senior Connecticut fellow.
Okay.
And look at the story I'm about to send you.
I will now.
It's from the Hartford Courant, and it's about John Larson gets an earful about impeachment at emotional West Hartford Town Hall last month. So the idea that, it was all the security people pushing this, no.
Okay, good. I'm glad we got back around to that. Well, I didn't want to
I was listening to what you're saying. I'm just trying to support you.
Good. I like it. Thanks very much. Don't eliminate democracy in our finest hour. Please. Okay. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Discussion continues. Let's see, we left off with you sending me the Hartford Courant story about John Larson being part of the dam break, playing his part in all of this, resisting popular calls at town halls for impeachment last month, and I guess now, depending on how you look at it, giving up the ghost or joining the parade or getting instructions from somewhere. There's mixed causation to everything. I guess ultimately that's the last point I have not yet made that we have to add to all this. It's not necessarily the case that there wasn't planning, plotting, and backstage statecraft driving this, but it's also definitely not the case that public pressure plays no role in all of this and that they ignore everything. It would be awfully foolish of us to, like I said, to deny the existence of democracy in what could turn out to be one of our, well, if not our finest hour, our better moments anyway.
So it turns out that the same reporters who were writing "The Dam is Breaking," the ones who were there, the reporters who are Matt Fuller and Steve Dennis and the congressional reporters Sungmin Kim, who were there all the time, for a week or so, have been talking about the fact that there's things that just feel different. A lot of the freshmen and others went home and heard from their constituencies during the recess this summer and heard from them. And this Hartford Courant story is just John Larson hearing the same. He wanted to talk about Social Security. And if Representative John Larson hoped he was going to field a bunch of softball questions about his work on Social Security reform and healthcare during a town hall in West Hartford, he was sadly mistaken.
Yes.
Just impeach him, shouted a number of people. I want to know two things. First, have you read the Mueller report? And second, if you have, how can you justify not having impeachment proceedings? Larson's answer, that it was more prudent to wait for the results of multiple House investigations into the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, and Trump businesses did not seem to satisfy many in the audience. It is not surprising Larson is facing tough questions, and then they go on to the whole problem. But for impeachment to occur, nearly all House Democrats would have to support that action, since no support for impeachment is expected from House Republicans. They're just going to leave. They're retiring.
Yes.
I mean, 40% of them are leaving or retiring. It's astounding. They don't have the guts to say in public, I don't support this president.
Right.
They're leaving. They're voting with their feet.
As a matter of fact, just a quick hit did put aside a Kyle Griffin tweet about I think Washington Post story today. Martha Roby, Republican, just sort of a quick quote from one of her unnamed aides saying, yeah, she's retiring, and the reason is she's tired of having to pretend that she supports Trump all the time. Ooh, okay.
So the Hill tweeted, freshman Democrat from swing district says he'll back impeachment of Trump if whistleblower claim is true. This was a 6 p.m. from yesterday tweet, but the announcement of that freshman Dem, of course, was in the morning, and the Hill winds up tweeting the same thing 9 times a day.
Yeah, I like that.
But it was about Representative Dean Phillips, and Representative Dean Phillips tweet quoted that one and said, yep, it's me.
Yeah, that's right. I answered him and said, well, it's true. So now you know what to do.
Yeah, at least they got that one right.
Yeah.
So basically, that's what's been going on, and I just think the whole thing is fascinating. And I'm very pleased, obviously, about what's happening in Great Britain. We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know if Brexit can be stopped. We don't know if the Remainers will win. The other part of this, of course, is that the Labour Party, which is completely effed up, what happened is Jeremy Corbyn says we're going to stay neutral on this whole Brexit Remain thing. Corbyn wants to have a soft Brexit. He wants to leave. And his party decided to back him because God knows why, but the Remainers in the party wanted to put it to a vote, so the rebels brought a vote at a party meeting, and they lost. And they decided to deal with the Brexit question after the election, as if he's going to win election by nobody knowing what the hell he wants.
Yeah. Well,
so Jeremy Corbyn is the worst possible thing for Labour, and the only thing that makes people think that the Conservatives might still stay in power just with a different PM, no matter how much they've screwed up. So it's pretty remarkable there. That's a big thing, and you never know. Corbyn might be forced to do what he doesn't want to do. And at the same time, what may happen is the Lib Dems may wind up taking the prime ministership.
All right. Because
Corbyn's a jerk.
Weird.
But Boris Johnson is unacceptable. So we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know when the next election's going to be or whether or not there's going to be a vote of no confidence and what the timing is. But there's a whole lot of different things that can happen in the British system that don't necessarily happen in the American system.
I'd be curious to know what the Labour, not capital L, Labour Party, but the Labour position on
they are not pleased with Corbyn. Let's just put it that way.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the European Union. Would have thought would be viewed widely in the labor movement as a net positive for worker protection, et cetera, and importing some of the really robust labor law from Germany, et cetera, continental Europe. Would be a big change. I'm surprised that there's any question, but I really don't. That's something that would be obvious to a resident and not to me.
Yeah. So as Judd Legum points out this morning, this is really odd.
All right.
Oddity. Steve Doocy.
That is odd.
Fox and Friends?
Yes.
If the president said, I will give you money, but you've got to investigate Joe Biden, that is really off the rails wrong.
Oh.
But if it's something else, it'd be nice to know.
Yeah, well, it isn't. So, well,
right?
All right.
So Judge
out of
Liggum interprets it this way. This is a tell. Ducey's part of the team. They're trying to set up the standard as to whether Trump offered an explicit quid pro quo. That is not the standard. If Trump asked a foreign leader to investigate his political opponent, that's an impeachable offense. End of story.
Good point. I mean, it would also be helpful to note that
because Trump
did.
already said, I did it. And other stories with unnamed Trump people are saying, we are so screwed. He admitted to it.
Yes.
Those stories were circulating, too. Somebody in the White House, a Trump aide, a Trump advisor said, we are so screwed.
Well, good. I mean, Trump said that. It was a reaction to the Mueller report.
Rudy said
it.
Right? And that leads me to the next part of my rant. I don't have a lot of stuff to give you in terms of links here.
Oh, all right.
But what happened is they realized they were screwed.
Yeah.
So they sent Rudy out to do his crazy, guy locked up in the attic that we let out every couple of months. And hopefully he was so crazy that everybody would fawn over his wonderful performance of throwing smoke, so now nobody knows what's going on. Unfortunately for them, in this particular situation, explaining what's going on, as I did with the Dave Perry tweet, is pretty simple. And so they're trying to shift the story. No, it's not about Trump. It's all about Biden. Oh. And then you had these stories coming out. Maggie Haberman, we spoke to people in the White House, and they're very pleased with how things are going.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. I mean, what are you talking about? Nobody's buying this Biden stuff. It was a story for about 12 hours. Remarkably, the New York Times, Washington Post, even cable TV handled it much better than one would have expected. When I put up the pundit roundup yesterday, and perhaps I think I highlighted it on the show. I can't remember because yesterday was 7 years ago in dog years.
I'll see if I can remember.
When they did Ken Vogel's story on the front page, they pointed out there is no evidence that Biden did anything wrong.
Yes.
That's not the headline they wanted.
Oh.
They wanted to obscure it and say questions and shadows and clouds have been raised about Joe Biden. They're still trying to push that stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, this isn't good for Joe Biden to talk about Trump's impeachment with Ukraine because it's only going to hurt Biden. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. That's their line, and they keep pushing it. But it turned out the media handled this way more responsibly than I ever thought they would. You can argue because Biden's a dude. He's not Hillary Clinton. And so this isn't butter emails all over again. But there's other stories about, look how Biden's press shop is really aggressively pushing back about this, telling media reporters, calling them all and saying, we're not Hillary Clinton. We're not going to let you do this butter emails things all over again. Well, that may or may not be true in terms of what the Biden camp is doing. But the media doesn't have the same appetite to go after Biden that they did to go after Clinton. That's just a fact. You can argue about why that is. They like Uncle Joe.
I guess so. I mean, they certainly don't seem to have the same relationship.
They don't see blood in the water.
They disliked, a lot of reporters disliked the Clintons for a long time.
For various and sundry number of reasons. And they actually like Joe for various and sundry reasons. Again,
I'm not sure what they are.
Whatever the reason is, they're handling this differently. And it's just a remarkable, notable thing.
Well, that might be all right. I'm okay for it being handled differently. It's a tragedy what happened to the country because of the dislike for Hillary Clinton, but I can't undo it. So I don't know. I guess if they for nefarious reasons liked Joe Biden better, I guess I'd say, oh well.
Look, do you have access to the New York Times front page right now?
Well, do I have? If I don't move, I don't. But I can.
Okay, well, buttons. I'll just read it to you. It says Trump said to have frozen aid to Ukraine before call with its leader. Yes. Analysis: this time Trump seems to be saying, "So what if I did?" Then who supports an impeachment inquiry? Here's a full list.
All right, I can read these.
And the editorial board says, Mr. Trump, blow us away with your transparency. Then Ross Stouthout, does Trump want to be impeached? Sulzberger, the growing threat to journalism around the world, which is an interesting story of itself. I may not get to. And then, of course, the Boris Johnson story. My point is, you don't even see Joe Biden's name.
He's
in
been
all of those
buried.
Stories on the front page.
It's a conspiracy to undo the president. Okay, so are you reading me from paper, or if I go to
No, this
New York
is the
Times,
online thing.
Okay, well then I do have access to that.
Yeah. So the Washington Post mentions Biden. Of course, they have to. Trump ordered hold on Ukraine aid before calling its leader, officials say. And then their subheader, the Times didn't even mention it. The Times is getting all sorts of crap from their readers about how bad they've been. So I see the Times adjusting. Washington Post, Trump ordered hold on Ukraine. Yeah, because feedback never matters, right?
Right.
Trump ordered hold on Ukraine aid before calling its leader. Officials say President Trump's order a week before his call with Ukraine's new leader could raise more questions about the exchange and Trump's desire to see
really
Joe
soft,
Biden's
even.
son investigated. So at least they get Biden in there.
Yeah.
Trump turns UN into backdrop for attacks on Biden, which is true. That happened.
And Greta Thunberg.
Neither of those stories reflect badly on Biden, right? So this whole, if you mention his name, it's bad. I don't get that. Then Pelosi quietly sounding out House Democrats about impeachment, officials say. Ha ha ha. That's a good one. Senate Republicans dodge questions on Trump-Ukraine whistleblower complaint. That one doesn't even mention Biden. And then the one Biden story. In Trump's attacks on Biden, Democrats see a worrisome reprise of 2016. And that's, because Democrats are disarray and Democrats always worry.
Yes, worry.
But, that's mostly Biden free. And I think, again, that's not the result that Trump wanted. The Biden part of it seems to be a 24-hour story. This Trump stuff is a story with legs that is growing by the hour.
Yeah, well,
so,
once president.
That's just how it's playing, folks.
Yeah, good. That's how it should play. Trump, regardless of what we think of him, is supposedly the president. Joe Biden is not, though the play was to tie him to something that he did as vice president. It's, by comparison, it's convoluted and complicated and also not true.
Yeah. So in this case,
strikes.
Trump has the problem explaining what Biden actually did. He can't. All he says is, and he said this at the UN, if a Republican had done what Joe Biden did, he'd get the electric chair.
Right. I like that idea.
What?
I agree
What
with
did
it.
Biden
100%.
do? I don't have to explain it. It's all about corruption.
Yes. I'm not sure what he did, but if he had done that, then he would get the electric chair. But he didn't, and you did.
Remember,
and so I'm
a tell
ready to
is
do
when
it.
Trump accuses somebody of something.
Yes.
He did it.
That's it's been projection 100% of the time.
Right, so he figures he actually is a traitor, and not in a technical term according to the Constitution, as we all know, because we're not at war. But he betrayed the country, and he's worried about his own backside.
Well, he wouldn't want people to get off on a technicality. He's for law and order. So I say I'm not as worried about not indicting sitting presidents if they're sitting in electric chairs in certain cases, I guess.
Right.
So all right. I'm
Anyway,
glad he brought
that's
it
my
up.
special summary for today.
Yes, thank you.
Tomorrow we'll talk. Maybe we'll have enough information by tomorrow morning to add Israel to the mix. But for now, we have a demagogue and a populist who is falling in the United Kingdom.
Yep.
We have one who's in trouble in the United States, and we'll see what happens to the one
We'll
in
see
Israel.
what happens.
So all in all, it's a good day for democracy.
Yeah, we could really have a great follow-up tomorrow if Israel works on their issues today.
Yeah, then we'll have the trifecta.
Yeah, cool.
But today, what happens today in Israel, what happened is that everybody met with President Rivkin, who, again, has the power to decide who forms the government, or at least is invited to. Today,
Can he prorogue it?
Benny Gantz from the Blue and White Party and Bibi Netanyahu from Likud are actually spending the day negotiating, giving the idea that there will be some kind of unity government with the two largest parties who, between them, will have enough votes. And they'll be joined, if they agree, by Avigdor Lieberman, so long as the Arabs aren't part of it because he's a racist. And then at the same time, the issue on the table is going to be, okay, what then happens and who gets to be prime minister? Now, here's the thing. If Gantz goes first and Netanyahu goes second, because they have done this in the past, they've had rotating prime ministers with a unity government. That happened a couple of decades ago. But if Gantz goes first and Netanyahu goes second, by the time it's Netanyahu's turn, he'll probably already have been indicted.
Maybe, yeah.
And as a non-prime minister, even if he's given the defense, the foreign ministry, the domestic, even if he's given all the portfolios other than the prime minister, he'll have to resign.
All right.
So Gantz, I think, is the other thing that'll happen is that if Gantz goes first and then it's Netanyahu's turn, by the time it's Netanyahu's turn, the knives will be out for him, just like Nigel Farage in Great Britain. Don't forget, all of these people are incredibly ambitious.
Yes.
Nigel Farage is not alone. No. So by the time we get there, Netanyahu thinks he's going to be prime minister. He may not be prime minister. So that's the maneuvering that's happening today. And tomorrow, I think, is the day that they're going to announce what they decided.
Unless, well, tomorrow will be the day, I guess. And now I'm wondering, what if they opt to go with the, like, we'll make a football analogy. I won the toss. We'll kick and give them the first chance because I don't think they're ready.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
So that's part of it too. Israeli politics is even more complicated than UK politics. And UK politics is complicated, among other reasons, besides the fact that they have a whole different set of rules, is that in a parliamentary system, remember, Boris Johnson was not elected by other than a small number of his own party deciding that he was going to replace Theresa May. But in the parliamentary system, voters don't get a direct vote for the prime minister anyway. So it's rather confusing in terms of how that happens. And Israel, which has something like 29 different parties in the Knesset, is even more complicated.
Yes. Well, that does complicate things. Yeah. Well, all right. I'm excited to see what they do with this today and the negotiations ongoing. Are they going to eat? That sounds like a good meeting.
Yeah, that's right.
As Trump regards it. There's a meal. Can I come?
Well, I was thinking more in terms of Israeli attitudes, right? Look, they're trying to destroy our government. Let's eat.
Right. It's always a good solution for everything. All right.
Always a good solution. So I'm going to leave you with this one last thing. And again, I have to emphasize I'm no expert in these international politics things. I have people I can draw on to go and ask people stuff.
Let's do that.
And so that's where I'm getting my information from. But a little bit more domestic here. Of course, we have Greta Thunberg at the United Nations embarrassing all the adults. And who said this?
Okay.
Clearly, my sister's paycheck is more important than the world her 3 adopted kids will inherit. I can no longer apologize for a sibling who I no longer recognize. I can and will continue to call out the monstrous behavior and the bully commentary born out of anger. Who said that?
I don't know what it means. I don't know.
It's Laura Ingram's brother.
Oh.
Laura Ingram compares Greta Thunberg and youth climate activists to Stephen King's Children of the Corn.
Oh. Only the second worst comparison that Republicans made yesterday.
Well, as many people said on Twitter, because this morning Trump is going after Greta Thunberg in his tweets. And, people say, look, in Trump's defense, it's not the worst thing he ever did to a teenage girl.
That's true, too. He'll be dating her in 10 years. You know that.
Right. But this is Curtis Ingram, Laura Ingram's brother, saying, my sister is completely swept away by her paycheck.
Well, it's a big paycheck, so it's easy to see how it could happen. That's interesting. I would never have guessed Laura Ingram's brother. I think that was a setup. I couldn't guess that. But
yeah, you would have guessed it was Boris Johnson's brother, who's already done this.
Right. Harold Trump. No, he said sister. I don't know. Some unknown person. But yeah, well, that is interesting. I guess the Thunberg speech was interesting all by itself. We'll have to get to that at some point later on.
You know what the best part of it was? Somebody asked Greta Thunberg if she'd be meeting with Trump, and she said, of course not. That would be a complete waste of time.
She's absolutely right. One of the better pieces of video that came out of yesterday was her staring daggers through him as he, kind of waddled in front of her. I wonder what the situation, what was she doing standing around there? She seemed to be sidelined, and I don't know whether she was just being her shy self. I'm done speaking. But Trump sort of saw microphones and went, ooh, right in front. It was great. And by the way, we got a great, I did call for somebody to please Photoshop lasers coming out of her eyes. And I got a great response from another, it wasn't Darth, but Chunkled, who I've seen is quite a Photoshop maven himself. Put together a really great one that I circulated yesterday, but he replaced the actual Trump with a waddling version of the Trump baby balloon that they use over in the UK, wandering onto the scene, and her eyes light up with lasers and blow them up. It's a fun one if you haven't seen it.
All right. Well, anyway, that's my summary for today, special summary for today, International Edition. And we will be back tomorrow for our regular show, and we'll see what's happened between now and then.
That's all gone to hell, I guess, depending on who you are. But all right, terrific. We're all prepared. Thank you so much for joining us for the special edition. I knew it would just be too tough to do all this without you here, knowing that you were at home saying, ooh, look at all these articles I have. Thanks so much for doing it.
I do all of this in sorrow, and anger, just like Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, I'm very sad.
Right. I mean, there is one serious point to be made here. And that is that the President of the United States represents to most Americans stability.
Well, that's silly.
And, forget the individual. I'm talking about the office.
I see.
And so when you have an unstable person who's a chaos agent in that stability position, well, we've seen what that means over the last 3 years. But my point is, it is a very difficult thing for many Americans to even conceive of impeachment because that is an attack on stability.
Okay.
And so, you better come at it in sorrow and not in anger.
Oh, yeah, me. I'm sorry.
Because the effects on the country are vast.
This is true.
Or as Charlie Pierce puts it, pure joy.
Hallelujah. I'm asking for fireworks.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what he told me on Twitter yesterday.
Good. All right. Well, okay.
That's Charlie Pierce. But for most Americans, most average voters, this is not something to celebrate, but you got to do what you got to do. You have to.
Yes, I'll agree by saying most average American voters know that the public face of this has to be But am I
And for those of you who do not appreciate Nancy Pelosi, let me just tell you, she knows what she's doing.
Okay. Well, I guess that's
she may
a
have
good
bad
answer.
judgment. Her timing may have been off. She maybe should have been doing this a long time ago. But when it comes time to orchestrating the proper way to do this, you're looking at it.
Okay, I can buy that. I think most Americans are probably split about it in a number of ways, not the least of which is
you
how
want
they
Seth
feel about
Moulton
it
doing this
publicly. No, that's true. And if it
you
comes out
remember
well,
all of that stuff. Who should be the speaker?
I do.
This is why she's the speaker.
Yeah. Okay. This part of it, the decision on the snap decision, absent movement. And here's where the public pressure comes into it. Absent all of that, leaving the decision to her. I don't know how I feel about that, but decision being made. How do you roll it out?
Yeah.
Okay, I would be willing to listen. I might not agree necessarily, but I'll be willing. That I'll entertain.
Yeah. In fact, that part you're good at. She's good at counting votes. She's good at rolling stuff out.
Yeah, because that's vote counting.
Because that's the job, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the job.
Right.
And she did it in a way that protected those 7 people, including Abigail Spanberger, our favorite, pick on the congressperson. And she did it in such a way that Spanberger is in fact protected.
Yeah. So I guess it worked.
Don't isolate Spanberger. Surround Spanberger with all the other people. Don't forget, of the 7, Spanberger has the most Trumpy district.
All right. We're doing this out of love for you, Abigail.
Yep. Exactly. Now play along like we asked, okay?
Right. That's my public-facing response on it. I'm so proud to have been a part of this.
Politics. It's so complicated. Take care, and I'll talk about it with you tomorrow.
Excellent.
We got some nice stuff if you want from Iowa Starting Line, key points about the state of the race in Iowa.
Okay.
And, we'll leave you with whatever you want to talk about. It's your show. It's Tuesday.
Okay.
I'm not even supposed to be here.
It's like clerks here. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. And it helped make the first hour of this a lot more coherent, I think. Thanks so much for joining us.
Order.
Yes.
See you tomorrow.
All right. Take care. We'll start again tomorrow. There's an awful lot still to come. And I guess we'll probably read some of the analysis that looms in the background just to get caught up with these things. I guess one other observation that I will note that will add to the political science and the voter thought process, such as it may be, that's looming in the background. I did note yesterday Nate Silver making this unusual point, saying, as I talked about on our pod, which I didn't get to listen to, but maybe you did, I wonder how much of the large gap between Trump's disapproval rating, which he pegs at about 54%, because data, it wasn't something he pulled out of a hat, and support for impeachment, which he pegs at around 37%. I wonder how much of that gap has to do with the election being in a year from now and the public wanting to decide for itself what to do about Trump. The principle that in a democratic system, the preferred recourse should be at the ballot booth, not box, but booth, seems underrated in the elite discourse around impeachment, both as a matter of theory and practice, i.e. in understanding why impeaching Trump heretofore isn't very popular. That hints at the possibility you could extract from that, okay, well, what that means is that, again, the approaching this with sorrow and not joy, and it's a serious thing, and the presidency represents stability in this country, and we don't want to destabilize the country. That, I think, is something that people might actually feel inherently, but the idea that individual voters in the main, or even among rare, super thoughtful voters, the idea that they sit around and say, well, the principle in a democratic system is that we prefer recourse at the ballot booth rather than impeachment. And I wonder whether the gap between the popularity of impeachment and Trump's disapproval rating has to do with that. I doubt very much that that is a conversation that voters have had with themselves, at least at that level. It's entirely possible that they may have come to a conclusion that's explainable in the abstract in that way. But, I think that more to do with the gap between disapproval rating and support for impeachment has more to do with where are my elites today? Where does the newspaper say leaders like Nancy Pelosi are on it? And absent access to her inner thought process, she is on a no. So I'm there too. That will now change. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I note, for the record, by the way, has been sitting here for a while, the comment from Karen D, who tweets, of course, as Kare, Kare, SF, asking the question, how many times did Caesar refuse the crown? So are we talking about here, I've lost the train a little bit. I saw the comment come in, and I wasn't sure. I guess I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it. This comes from about 37 minutes ago. So are we talking about the Pelosi approach to things, like I'm not going to take any particular joy in or rush at the opportunity to impeach Donald Trump? We're going to pretend to be reluctant about it? Is that what we're talking about here? Because it's certainly an apt comment. I just want to make sure we're linking it to the right things here because, well, everyone else will recognize how apt it really was so long as I connect it to the right thing. I want to be sure I'm doing that, so I'll just check in with you, Karen. Okay, let's see. Approach to today from this point on. I don't know. We can catch up, I guess, on maybe we do it like we did yesterday, talking about the dam break with respect to yesterday's analysis and stories, either through looking at Pocket. I don't know which is the more efficient here, looking at Pocket or looking at what was I retweeting, because not everything that I retweet makes it into Pocket, and then I run around saying, didn't I put that away? Why not? But it's a lot more disjointed in the timeline because we're dealing with 2 or 3 different things at any given moment. Let me look at Pocket and see what I put aside. I did mention to you that I had seen Kyle Griffin tweeting about a Washington Post story The reason I thought I'd put away the Post story, but rather than read you the whole thing, I'll just take Kyle's highlighting here. One Republican aide close to Republican Representative Martha Roby, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to Washington Post to speak frankly, said Roby decided to retire in part because she was tired of pretending she backed Trump. This piece is titled "Trump's Takeover of GOP Forces Many House Republicans to Head for the Exits." Just a little additional commentary on the note that Greg offered us about Republicans scrambling for the exits on this one. So I wanted to put that one out there. Let's see. I think, maybe we'll save this for tomorrow when we return to the British Parliament situation. Although I definitely wanted to make note of the fact how interesting it was to me that the Supreme Court decided that the upshot of their decision was not that the proroguing of Parliament was unlawful and that he lied to the Queen, and so therefore Parliament is back in session, but that they've decided it was never out. It was so invalid on its face that there was no prorogation, period. It wasn't done. And that's an interesting way of settling it. I don't know that our own court would have come up with the same solution, but I'm also not entirely certain. We probably have to wait a day or two for British legal analysts to tell us why they went that way. My first guess is, I don't know. I mean, so they've decided clearly that he lied to the Queen, and that should be excuse enough. But monarchs are weird in general. I mean, they're got to be weird people, but the way we treat them is pretty weird, and it almost feels as though they felt like they had to say, well, although it's clear to us that Johnson lied to her and she didn't do this maliciously or even erroneously, she just was lied to. I mean, maybe that's part of it. You know, the Queen doesn't make these errors. It wasn't prorogued. It didn't happen. The Queen did not err in any way, but it certainly would have been probably enough for us in the United States, not used to deferring to monarchs all the time, I guess, to simply say, well, sure, she did it, but it was a mistake. She only did it because she was lied to, so she's not to blame for it. But you have to go a little further than that for a monarch and say it never happened. I'm curious about why they did that. And by the way, for those of you actually curious about it, the full decision is available online. I have seen it tweeted around. There are links. I believe it goes at about 25 pages in the PDF. So as fascinating as it would be for us to read it in its entirety here, that can't be what we spend our time on, but I might do so afterwards because I'm a super nerd and I want to know what's going on. So that's I just want to let you know that that's out there. Perhaps we can provide you a link to that and you can take a look. BuzzFeed has the intriguing headline, as they usually do. This is why they're BuzzFeed. Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament is unlawful. WTF happens now. I don't know whether BuzzFeed has an inside view of what happens or whether they're just guessing or what. And but it's a good question. It's the question everyone's asking. The second question everyone would be asking if I read this article now would be, does BuzzFeed have any idea or are we just wasting our time? But I will let you decide that. And unless we magically find a gap at the end of the show, I don't know that I'll turn around and read that one, although I would like to know what the hell's going on. There's so much happening here that I think we can answer with respect to what's going on that we're going to move on to that. Let's see. I have also, this is interesting, just from a purely, non-newsworthy view here. I have in pocket Brian Klaas's tweet about it that Greg provided for me before there was any written material about the court's decision. He sent me this tweet from him. And I'm just noticing, he looks like a younger version of, what's the actor's name? I don't remember the actor's name, but in the movie was on TV last night, and anytime Pretty Woman is on TV, my wife loves to watch it, and so there it was on, and he looks like the guy who's the manager of the hotel, who's constantly inserting himself into matters there. Brian, have you ever seen the show or ever seen the movie? You should. Anyway, let's see. There's Washington Post reporting that I put aside, and it for some reason shows up in Pocket as a dead link, but I know that it isn't. There's, I think, two very important parts of the story. One is, of course, the 7 freshman Democrats who come together for this op-ed. And I'll just give you the headline on this one. You all know the story behind it. These allegations are a threat to all we have sworn to protect. And I guess if there's any strength to be lent to the analysis that the Ukraine story is totally different from all the rest and changed the atmosphere, and I really just don't, ultimately I don't buy it, but there's a lot of analysis that swings on this. A lot of this analysis that it wasn't you people out there calling for impeachment that made the difference. This was a qualitative difference. There is some difference, of course, but I don't even really buy into it's separate from and different in kind from Russiagate. It's absolutely not. I mean, it's tied together very strongly, and it's not just because Russia and Ukraine are neighbors and one a junior partner in the former Soviet Union, but Russia is a huge player in Ukraine, and even the prior Ukrainian governments were very tied into events and the influence of Russia. I think it's bizarre to try to separate the two, but for political purposes, it seems like some of the 7 freshman Democrats here and others who are following in their wake feel like it's important to delineate here and to hold the Ukraine allegations out as something separate. And even I think was it Benji Sarlin we were discussing earlier, who was tweeting, Greg, he seems to be of that mind as well, that this is a different case because, I think he put it in his tweet, that, or maybe it was someone else reacting to his tweet, that this is not, the Ukraine thing isn't a backward-looking, let's punish Trump for what he's done, but rather a forward-looking, let's protect our democracy and our elections from future subversion from out of Ukraine. But of course, it's not really Ukraine that's dealing the subversion. If anything, it's Russia driving it. Even if Russia weren't, in this case, pushing the Ukrainian government to do this, and I guess there's reason to believe that that's not the case, given who's now at the head of a new, hopefully reformed Ukrainian government. It's still being driven by Putin's awareness and therefore Trump's awareness that they're sitting on a bubble here, and that looming in the background is Putin's Russia as a threat to Ukraine, and the only way they can see clear to getting the aid they need is knuckling under to Trump, who would then free up the aid. What they would be doing, of course, is, I guess, freeing up military aid for them to later be pressured into not using to resist Russia or pro-Russian separatists anyway. So maybe that's why maybe that's the path out of this for the Ukrainian government. We're not going to get the benefit of the bargain on our end by doing Trump's bidding here. Putin looms regardless, and he's not going to give us a pass because we gave Trump a pass. Putin probably just doesn't really ultimately care that much about Trump. So I think we're screwed even if we do what Trump wants, so we might as well not. Anyway, there's an awful lot going on in all this, of course. But I think we maybe should turn back to the, I guess what the Post considers its hard news reporting here in the national security section. Trump ordered hold on military aid days before calling Ukrainian president, officials say. And let's see. How long does this run? It's not even all that long. So maybe we'll breeze through this and comment on it as well. But I think this is what has taken the Ukraine story to the next level so far. President Trump told his acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, to hold back almost $400 million in military aid for Ukraine at least a week before a phone call in which Trump is said to have pressured the Ukrainian president to investigate the son of former Vice President Joe Biden, according to 3 senior administration officials. Pretty serious. And by the way, I guess we'll note for the record here, just holding back military aid to a west-facing NATO aspirant in Ukraine, I'll have to play with the forms of the words we use here, but a Ukraine that has been interested in integrating into the West, integrating into the European Union, into NATO, etc., to separate itself from Russia. And they are literally under military attack, occupation of Crimea, the backing of, it's really only the thinnest of veils that through which the Russians deny essentially invading all of Ukraine. But Russian-backed pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine fighting a hot war there. And in the middle of all this, just the United States president turning his back on people looking to bolster their independence and put space between them and the looming Russians, that's pretty amazing. Only the thinnest of reeds to cling to between that and just outright treason. It's, I guess, because the reed being, well, he's aiding the Russians, but not in a war against us here in the United States, just against the Ukrainians, which obviously is a very different thing. But of course, the definition of treason that the Constitution offers was, of course, put forth in a very, very different time. They wouldn't have contemplated our involvement internationally around the world, and they didn't want to, and there were very specific reasons for it, and maybe it's best if we don't do things this way, otherwise we end up perverting American interests or our interpretations of American interests such that we are, for instance, fighting wars around the world to prevent the domino effect, et cetera, et cetera. And anyway, but it's really amazing purely from a national security perspective. You don't want to go as far as, well, it borders on treason. And certainly the idea that the President of the United States would be making a matter of, even if he was doing it through legal channels, making it American policy to turn our backs on people who are literally fighting for their lives and their freedom against encroachment and invasion from Russia. And that's not just me saying it. That's Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan and Rogers and Scalise, all of those caught on tape in May of 2016 talking about it. They had just met with the then new Ukrainian government, I reminded you last week, to hear about how threatening it was to be in the shadow of Russia and still be trying to assert your independence and your westward-facing sense of freedom and destiny and self-determination. And I guess that was the last time Republicans were for helping people free themselves from the Russian orbit. They switched that off because Trump, because bribes, because emoluments, because self-dealing, because treason, and they all decided they were all in on it after all. I find that just that's an important part of all this, and I bring that up so that you will have it on hand to push back on, or just outright reject it when you hear that it's an entirely separate issue from Russia, whether you're hearing that from Republicans in Congress who want it to be entirely separate, or from news analysts who you might even think of as liberal leaning, who nonetheless are for some reason interested in making sure that nobody take any credit for having moved the ball on impeachment, but the people that they have access to interview and you don't. Basically, I think is what underlies some of this. Okay, I'm departing from the article, but I think important. I don't. This is what occurs to me when I read about this article. So back to the Post piece here. Officials at the Office of Management and Budget relayed Trump's order. And remember, this is another extraordinarily important part of it. Trump's order. He's directly involved in this. And that they think of as being very different from what was revealed in the Russia situation and the Mueller investigation. And even that is not clear to me. But I think that his direct involvement was in many cases downplayed in the Mueller report, not even necessarily for lack of evidence, but rather possibly just to keep it logically consistent that since they had begun the investigation under the assumption that they were never going to be able to indict him for these, what are in fact truly crimes, they would only end up looking feckless and stupid if they established beyond a reasonable doubt that the president was directly involved and then said, we don't know what to do about it. So I'm not sure whether they played their full hand on that. But here, officers at OMB relayed Trump's order to the State Department and the Pentagon during an interagency meeting in mid-July, according to officials who spoke on condition of anonymity, of course. They explained that the president had, quote, concerns and wanted to analyze whether the money needed to be spent. You're telling me he's watching the bottom line now? I don't think so. Not this guy. Administration officials were instructed to tell lawmakers, this is important too, that the delays were part of an interagency process, but to give them no additional information, a pattern that continued for nearly 2 months until the White House released the funds on the night of September 11th. And then again, 10 or 12 days later when they were busted with the latest round of stories on Ukraine. So interesting. The thing to take away from that is the instructions came from Trump. Mulvaney passed them on to other agencies. And then when members of Congress said, hey, we passed millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars for defense in Ukraine. Why isn't it getting delivered here? We're hearing from the Ukrainians, where's our money? And what's the answer? Please lie to them about what's going on. Tell them there's some sort of interagency process. It's not interagency process. It's Trump's orders not to release the money. The interagency process is the people in the agencies saying, what should we do with this obviously corrupt and improper order, or how should we implement it as agency staff? How do we turn this into action? That's the only interagency process there was. Trump's order to withhold aid to Ukraine a week before his July 25th phone call with Vladimir Zelensky is likely to raise questions about the motivation for his decision and fuels suspicions on Capitol Hill that Trump sought to leverage congressionally approved aid to damage a political rival. Stopping again here to erase the line between this and Russiagate one more time. What's the motivation? Well, okay, to most people, the obvious motivation is I want to be able to use this to leverage help from Ukraine. Why, though, does Trump think he's going to be able to get help from Ukraine? And what might be the motivation for his decision to damage Ukraine's ability to defend itself against Russia? That's what's going on here. Where it's not aid that's being withheld in the abstract. It's not aid that's supposed to be going for water development projects in Ukraine. It is military aid to fight Russia. The reason Trump holds up military aid to fight Russia is he is Vladimir Putin's puppet, just like Hillary Clinton told you he was and would be as president. It hurts Ukraine's ability to fight against Russian invasion and influence in order to do it, or by doing it. By withholding the aid, he helps Russia directly in their aims in Ukraine. In addition, it may also be the case that he is able to leverage help for his reelection in some fashion from doing this. And it's okay for him to run this play because it is clear to him that no matter what he promises in terms of aid to Ukraine, Russia is appreciative of the delay. Releasing the funds may or may not be of any concern to Russia. I don't know whether or not Russia thinks $250 million or even $400 million in military aid to Ukraine makes any sort of difference whatsoever in their campaign in Ukraine. I'm sure they'd rather have it be zero, but I don't think it even gets released by Trump unless it's okay with Putin. So there's a lot of interplay here. It's not separate from Russiagate. It shouldn't be separated from Russiagate. And I think it's a mistake for pundits to try to tell you that that's the case. I want that on the record, too. The revelation comes as lawmakers clash with the White House over a related whistleblower complaint made by an intelligence official alarmed by Trump's actions, and as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is said to be exploring whether it's time to allow impeachment proceedings. Hence the first hour of the show. Republican senators on the Senate Appropriations Committee said September 12th that the aid to Ukraine had been held up while the Trump administration explored whether Zelensky, the country's new president, was pro-Russian or pro-Western. Well, I guess sometimes you want to look behind the mask a little bit. What if he's not telling the truth in having campaigned as being pro-Western, or at least not even? Maybe he's not even pro-Russian or pro-Western. He's just anti-Russian, and that might not be the same thing as pro-Western, or it might mean yes, pro-Western, but not the United States, which used to be the leader of the free Western world, but no longer is. So we have to refine our terminology here. Anyway, I guess Republicans on the Senate Appropriations Committee said that was the reason for the delay. They said the White House decided to release the aid after Senator Richard Durbin threatened to freeze $5 billion in Pentagon funding for next year unless the money for 2019 was distributed. That's an interesting take on things. I'm not certain exactly what they're speaking of or what power Durbin has to freeze $5 billion in Pentagon funding, unless he's saying, I will hold up the DOD appropriations bill over some particular provision or another. But or it might just be them BSing their way through this and trying to blame a Democrat for it. One senior administration official on Monday said that Trump's decision to hold back the funds was based on his concerns about there being, quote, a lot of corruption in Ukraine, and that the determination to release the money was motivated by the fiscal year's looming close on September 30th, which really has nothing to do with anything. But that's a new line that Trump was testing out yesterday, that it was okay for him, in fact, good for him to talk to Zelensky about the Biden situation, because the Biden situation in his mind was corruption, in Trump's mind was corruption, and Trump saying, well, it used to be the case anyway, and it may still be the case. We're just trying to find out what's going on in Ukraine, but it used to be the case that Ukraine's government was very corrupt, and you've got to talk to the new president of a country that was notoriously corrupt in order to tell him that you want to have the United States help him root out corruption and become a fully integrated member of the Western democracies club because we get rid of corruption in our Western democracies. You could debate, how valid a statement that is. And you can certainly evaluate how valid a statement it was from Trump. It's just not. It's a backwards, it's a backfill of an excuse. But it actually does double duty here. I guess he thought, well, it's perfectly normal for the United States president to talk to the president of Ukraine about rooting out corruption in Ukraine. And I also think that Biden is mixed up in corruption in Ukraine. He's not. But here's the thing. We began discussing it a little bit yesterday, and maybe we'll have to just wait until after the break to fully flesh this out. But remember that Biden, to the extent that he was involved in Ukraine and the firing of this prosecutor at all, was just one of several world leaders who agreed openly that this prosecutor was corrupt and needed to go. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Almost missed McHugh here, taking a look at what's happening on Twitter, and it's moving so fast, so many things being passed around, and so distracting. It was almost too distracting. But the music reminded me that we needed to come back and finish up a show here. Okay, so when we left off, I was saying that we did learn through news reporting yesterday and some of it being repeated today, that remember that I guess the kernel of truth that's very often found distorted at the center of a Trump conspiracy theory or fevered belief in this case is that yes, Joe Biden did demand of the previous Ukrainian government that what's their terminology for it? Their prosecutor general was widely viewed as corrupt and needed to be dismissed. The complaint from around the world being that he was himself corrupt and that he was not interested in bringing serious corruption cases against others in the government or in and around the government, oligarchs, etc., for their own corruption. Not interested at all in cleaning up corruption, but rather in covering up corruption because he was in on the corruption. But apparently this was something widely believed in Western governments at the time, and that the task fell, for whatever reason, leadership of the free world and all that, to the United States, and that the person delegated to deliver that message, because he was visiting with and dealing with Ukraine and Ukrainian politicians, was Joe Biden. Now, so we're in a position for relatively good reason, pardon me, where we're seeing Joe Biden apply this pressure on the government of Ukraine. And the fevered brains at Fox News need to look for something. Is there a way that we can use this to damage the Obama administration, Joe Biden in particular? Perhaps at that point it didn't occur to them that it was necessary to embarrass Joe Biden personally, but later on, when it became clear that maybe that would be in their interest because he might end up running against their guy, they dug this back up. But they tried this then, and it didn't work then either. Joe Biden isn't, their theory went, pressuring the government of Ukraine to get rid of a corrupt prosecutor because it's the international Western consensus that he's corrupt, but rather because his son is, we found, we Googled Biden in Ukraine and we came up with this hit where his son, Hunter, is on the board of a company, a gas and oil company in Ukraine. And as it happens, as is frequently the case in former Soviet states, the gas and oil concerns there are operate on a basis less than above board and clean by Western standards, or sometimes outright corruptly, and they're very frequently in the hands of oligarchs who essentially raided the state assets during the breakup of the Soviet Union, grabbing the things for themselves in private ownership, and having stolen a very valuable state asset, are able to make billionaires of themselves. So for a person with the Biden last name to be on the board there is a potential trouble point. So in their minds, they imagined that they could sell people on the story that it wasn't that Joe Biden, in agreement with a dozen international Western governmental leaders, believed that the prosecutor general of Ukraine was corrupt and needed to be pushed out on that basis alone, but rather, wasn't it really true that there was some nefarious interest in this, and that because he was in a position to prosecute the company on which Biden's son sat, on whose board Biden's son sat for corruption, that what was really going on here was Biden was trying to push out this prosecutor general before he could get his son caught up in this situation. And one of the big problems with it is that apparently this prosecutor general showed no inclination whatsoever to prosecute this company, shady though it may have been, and I'm not really sure whether it was or wasn't, but it's a pretty good bet that an oil and gas concern in Ukraine probably was, particularly under previous regimes. And that might be a good question for Hunter Biden one day to say, did you really think it was a great idea to get involved in this company? It was an easy paycheck, but don't you think that the Biden last name made it a minefield? Yeah, maybe. And thinking back about this, yes. But they were essentially inventing a conspiracy theory about what the motivation was here for Biden, and it was something that they were able to sell on Fox News, because Fox News is interested in telling people the worst thing it possibly can about Democratic politicians, regardless of whether it's true or not, But there was enough of a kernel of truth that they could push this thing. It didn't really take flight then. Nobody cared, but it was something they recognized that they could revive once they saw Joe Biden running for president. And that's basically what has happened here. But as I said, the problem here is that it was universally recognized at the time that Ukraine had a corruption problem. And that's why I find it so odd that Trump is actually putting effort into telling everybody, well, the reason I pressured the new government of Ukraine about rooting out corruption is that everybody knows that the old Ukrainian government was so corrupt. So therefore, it's okay for me to be talking to them about cleaning, quote unquote, cleaning up corruption. Now, two things about that. One, that's a concession that the prior Ukrainian governments did indeed have a tremendous problem with corruption. So Joe Biden might very well, and I think he was, have been absolutely positively right to do what he did. And we know that, he had the backing of so many other governments. And, in this day and age, that's supposed to be cover for being right about this thing, even though, yes, it can also be something else. But for a dozen Western countries to all have thought the same thing and to have tasked Biden with the job of doing this is now confirmed by Donald Trump saying, well, yeah, the prior governments of Ukraine were terribly corrupt. So I was right to talk to them about corruption now. Well, if that's the case, then Biden was even more right to talk to them about corruption then. But I don't see very much spin that way. And instead, it's probably a much better strategy for everyone involved to simply say, no. You're full of it. Totally, you're just making this up. Biden wasn't involved in this. Much simpler story for discussing with the public. But, we discuss things more in depth here. The second thing I think we ought to take away from it. And I'm blanking out on my second thing here. So Trump is insisting that he was talking to them about, yes. The second part of it, I guess, is another warning about if Trump isn't an evil genius, and we just have such a hard time believing he's any kind of genius. The other explanation of what's going on here is another illustration of how incredibly dangerous it is to have an empty-headed, Fox-believing moron as president of the United States. If it's that easy to convince the president of the United States, who wields enormous power, enormous flexibility, enormous latitude to do things, if you believe Jack Goldberg, that are horrifically out of step with the best interests of the United States from a national security standpoint or any other. But it's okay for him to do that because we have, vested him with that power under the Constitution. This is how dangerous it can be to have an empty-headed moron who believes Fox News garbage to be president. Fox News made this crap up, essentially, out of this tiny kernel of truth. It became a whole conspiracy theory that the real reason the United States government and a dozen other governments around the Western world were interested in pushing out an obviously corrupt prosecutor general in Ukraine wasn't an international interest in fair dealing with an emerging pro-Western democracy such that we would be able to do business there, although sometimes I guess it's worth noting that sometimes doing business there, twirling my mustache here, equals exploiting the situation for rapacious gain on the part of some of our own billionaires. But clearly, the rest of the Western world was interested in cleaning up the act in Ukraine. They thought they could profit from a more democratic, more fairly operating Ukraine, and they had some doubts about whether or not it was something they were going to be able to do or something that was worth doing. Are we going to move investment to Ukraine only to lose it to the hands of kleptocratic oligarchs? Or are we going to make some return here because there's some basis on which to, be able to expect and predict that profits will get into the hands of those investing, even if that's a bad idea in general, when we move money there? It's a big question. Anyway, I guess really the point here is when you have somebody as president who you can program with Fox nonsense, he will bring to bear enormous power and resources on behalf of the government of the United States in furtherance of absolute bullcrap that has no basis in reality. And it's very, very dangerous for the so-called leader of the free world, in this case, not the president of the United States, but the United States itself, to operate this way on the world stage, on erroneous, false, and misleading theories about stuff that isn't really happening. Super effing dangerous. And that's the best illustration there is of it. And again, not unrelated to Russiagate, because the same sort of programming is happening with Vladimir Putin and the Russian trolls, who are very adept at finding the hot button issues among the, let's say, less than fully thoughtful and informed audiences, like that of Fox News and most of right-wing social media, and pushing those hot buttons and exploiting stories and spinning them into things that they're not. And for Donald Trump, he finds vindication of his stupid, empty-headed worldview in things that he's being fed by Vladimir Putin and his Russian trolls. And it's not a different kind of story. It's very much the same kind of story. The President of the United States is consistently getting things wrong in both domestically and internationally, in ways that just happen to be time after time after time insanely beneficial to Russia. And maybe this is a problem. And maybe it's treason. And that's why I wanted to linger on this one for so long. All right, there's actually more to the article. Let's see if it prompts any more things that I'm willing to convince myself are important thoughts. Let's see. One senior administration official on Monday said Trump's decision to hold back the funds was based on his concerns of there being a lot of corruption in Ukraine. That's how we got here. And that the determination to release the money was motivated by the fiscal year's looming close on September 30th. Not really sure what that's supposed to have to do with anything. There was concern within the administration that if they did not spend the money, they would run afoul of the law. Oh, no, not that. This official said, noting that eventually Trump gave the OMB's acting director — I didn't realize we had an acting director. I thought Mulvaney was still that — Russell Vought, Vought, permission to release the money. I guess they thought that maybe if it wasn't released by the end of the fiscal year, it would disappear. Don't know if that's actually the case. The official emphatically denied that there was any link between blocking the aid and pressing Zelensky into investigating the Bidens, stating it had nothing to do with the quid pro quo. But we already learned why that isn't an effective way of looking at it anyway. But on Capitol Hill, Democrats were calling for an investigation of what they viewed as potential extortion, as Senator Robert Menendez, the Foreign Relations Committee's ranking Democrat, put it Monday. Trump, he said, is trying to reshape American foreign policy, which he is allowed to do, to advance his personal and political goals, which he's not. I don't think it really matters whether the president explicitly told the Ukrainians that they wouldn't get their security aid if they didn't interfere in the 2020 elections, said Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. There is an implicit threat in every demand that the United States president makes of a foreign power. That foreign country knows that if they don't do it, they are likely to be consequences. Trump on Monday repeated his denial of doing anything improper and insisted that his July 25th conversation with Zelensky was a perfect phone call. That's his tell if there ever was one. He also hinted that he may release a transcript of it, and don't think that that's the end of it either. The White House spokesman Hogan Gidley rejected claims that Trump was engaged in a quid pro quo, another, again, more goalpost shifting. But because the media wants this story to be true so badly, they'll once again manufacture a frenzy and drive ignorant fake stories and attack this president, Gidley said before he was lined up against the wall. It appears the Ukrainian leader came away from the discussion with a different impression. Murphy, who spoke with Zelensky during an early September visit to Ukraine, said Monday that the Ukrainian president directly expressed concern at their meeting that the aid that was being cut off to Ukraine by the president was a consequence of his unwillingness to launch an investigation into the Bidens. He made it pretty clear to him. Hunter Biden, just so you know the name of the company, served for nearly 5 years on the board of Burisma, Burisma, Ukraine's largest private, gas company, whose owner came under scrutiny by Ukrainian prosecutors, for possible abuse of power and unlawful enrichment. Hunter Biden was not accused of any wrongdoing in the investigation. As Vice President Joe Biden pressured Ukraine to fire its top prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, who Biden and other Western officials said was not sufficiently pursuing corruption cases, at one point threatening to withhold $1 billion in loan guarantees. At the time, the investigation into Burisma was dormant, according to former Ukrainian and U.S. officials. Trump's allies have frequently said he has been better about distributing military aid, and specifically lethal aid, to Ukraine than his predecessor. Yet, according to Democratic and Republican aides, no administration has withheld funds as long and as mysteriously as the Trump administration did this year, since the United States began helping Ukraine fend off Russian-backed separatists in the country's eastern provinces. Congressional officials were notified twice this year, on February 28th and again on May 23rd, that the administration intended to release large tranches of military aid to Ukraine. Congress approved 2 large pots of military aid for Ukraine during fiscal 2019. There was the $250 million to be managed by the Pentagon for equipment such as sniper rifles, counter-artillery radar systems, ammunition, and grenade launchers, and a $141 million tranche to be funneled through the State Department for maritime security, NATO interoperability, and various initiatives to help Ukraine's military fend off Russian aggression. Despite those notifications, the money was not transmitted until this month. According to administration officials, discussions about Ukrainian aid began in June. Withholding aid from foreign governments is something the president has frequently requested, such as with Central America, this president anyway, such as with Central American countries, when he said they were not doing their part to help the United States with immigrants amassing at the southern border. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton wanted to release the money to Ukraine because he thought it would help the country while curtailing Russian aggression. Pretty simple. But Trump has said he was primarily concerned with corruption. It's very important to talk about corruption, Trump told reporters. If you don't talk about corruption, why would you give money to a country that you think is corrupt? That's not actually a coherent sentence. If you don't talk about corruption, why would you give money? I don't know. I mean, it's 2 sentences mashed together. But anyway, besides Bolton, several other administration officials said they did not know why the aid was being canceled or why a meeting was not being scheduled. The decision was communicated to state and defense officials on July 18th, officials familiar with the meeting said. By mid-August, lawmakers were acutely aware that the OMB had assumed all decision-making authority from the Defense and State Departments and was delaying the distribution of the aid through a series of short-term notices. They don't even have a director there. All they have is an acting director of OMB, and he's giving orders to Defense and State because they're, negligible little departments. Several congressional officials questioned whether the OMB had the legal authority to direct federal agencies not to spend money that Congress had already authorized, aide said. Yeah, good question. They don't. Spokespeople for the Pentagon and the State Department declined to comment. Mid-August is also when a whistleblower from the intelligence community filed a complaint regarding Trump and Ukraine to Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson. Atkinson informed the House and Senate Intelligence Committees of the complaint's existence on September 9th. The same day, the 3 House committees launched an investigation to determine whether Trump and his lawyer, Giuliani, had improperly pushed Ukraine to investigate the Bidens. Capitol Hill has not been briefed on the details of the whistleblower complaint. On orders of the acting director of national intelligence, Joseph Maguire, who, after consulting with the Justice Department and White House, declined to transmit the complaint to lawmakers. On Thursday, Maguire is set to testify publicly before the House Intelligence Committee in a closed session before the Senate Intelligence Committee. So that should be pretty interesting. That doesn't happen tomorrow, but on Thursday. So that's the end of the Washington Post report. We had a lot to add by way of commentary in that one. And I hope we did you some solid turns in doing so. Let's see. There's lots of calls for impeachment that are out there, various op-eds of varying strengths and with varying points being made. Let's see. I'm going to save this. This is going to be a long and involved one, but it's time also to bring back additions to the Trump Rogues Gallery and start talking about some of the people behind his belief about what Ukraine was doing and how that insane conspiracy theory got implanted in his head. We'll talk about some of those people. Some of those actors have been on hand very recently. We're at the state dinner the other night, have been accompanying his family members on trips around the world too, and our conspiracy-minded friend from Twitter, Der Wooter, has been tweeting about them feverishly for a couple of days. It's time to bring them to your attention. Maybe we will close things out then with some of the commentary on things. Well, as we frequently say here, you can't get through a day without referring to Brian Beutler, one of our great traditions here. Lots of people passing around his piece yesterday. Trump's Ukraine scandal is our last chance to get it right. I don't know if there's going to be revelations here or not, but it'll be part of our day of good feelings here to share this one, I think. The fact that Donald Trump tried to force the president of Ukraine to inflict political damage on Joe Biden ahead of the 2020 election is a crime and a colossal abuse of office, but it also presents institutional challenges to Democrats and the press that neither appear equipped to overcome. We're doing better today, I think. But at any rate, the stakes are no longer hypothetical, but will flatly determine whether Trump gets carte blanche to cheat in the 2020 election. We can see traces of the dysfunction in Democrats' continued reluctance to begin a full-throttled impeachment inquiry, and in the storyline unspooling in the political media that this scandal might hurt Biden or benefit Trump politically. Indeed, the failures feed off each other in a toxic way. To understand why, it's important to describe the scandal clearly and imagine a proportional response to it. With hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid on the line, Trump repeatedly hounded the president of Ukraine to work with his henchman, Rudy Giuliani, to manufacture a disinformation campaign against Biden, cloaked in the seeming legitimacy of a Ukrainian law enforcement investigation. His demands didn't come out of nowhere either. Trump involved himself directly in a project Giuliani had been working on since the spring, largely out in the open, perhaps frustrated at Giuliani's lack of progress. And now I feel like I need to jump back for just a second and name some names so that if news breaks about it today, you'll at least be on notice and have had fair warning that the BuzzFeed article that I'm waiting for later to share with you about the operatives behind this are gentlemen by the names of Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, frequently, apparently, mistakenly, maybe intentionally referred to as Igor Furman. But two big donors who BuzzFeed tells us pumped hundreds of thousands of dollars into Republican campaigns and dined with the president, who in a whirlwind of private meetings gathered repeatedly with top officials in Ukraine and set up the meetings for Rudy Giuliani as they turned up information that could be weaponized on the 2020 presidential race. I appreciate the effort to lay it at Giuliani's feet, and he's an evil bastard, and I don't mind that at all. But there are other operatives who need to be netted in this as well. Now you know their names so that if they become infamous internationally in the next day or two before we get to share the story, you'll be able to say, aha, I knew it, and I'll share that article with you. Read it, and we can discuss it perhaps tomorrow. Anyway, so that, as Brian was telling us about the frustration with Giuliani's lack of progress, was in late July, and we only learned about it in September because at some point an anonymous whistleblower decided it needed to come to light. As it happened, and in the months since, the top echelons of Trump's administration either passively tolerated the crime or actively participated in it. The vice president participated. Don't forget that. Lots of people talking about that today. The State Department reportedly facilitated meetings between Giuliani and Ukrainian officials, and there are very few, if any, clean hands left. So that's the State Department, Pompeo, vice president as well. Maybe you can knock two out of the park with one swing, let's say, to mix our metaphors. And this is a version of events that basically nobody disputes. Trump won't frame it this way or call it a crime or a shakedown, obviously, but he has admitted to all the alleged facts, as did Giuliani, and the specifics of the conversation came to light from what appear to be defensive leaks, meant to put the cleanest possible gloss on the story while the whistleblower complaint remains concealed. We still don't know if Trump made his threat to withhold aid explicit or if he promised additional bribes should Ukraine play along. What we already know, what is undisputed, is Trump's most positive spin, and it's also devastating. In a world that hasn't gone crazy, real impeachment proceedings would already be underway for all manner of past and ongoing crimes. But imagining this were the only thing we knew about Trump's corruption, the appropriate response would be for the House to use all of its powers as aggressively as possible to bring the rest of the story to light and then impeach the president. it'd be for the FBI to investigate Giuliani, and inevitably Trump, for conspiring to defraud voters and violate campaign finance law. Well, there's a little bit of roughing up of Democrats here at this point, which I guess given the developments of late last evening and this morning might be tempered at this point. I will share the rest of this with you, and well, we're all going to have to stay tuned for what happens. We'll see what happens with respect to whether we save democracy here, abroad, internationally, or not, and how it gets spun. Be on the lookout, please, for super savvy journalistic takes that de-emphasize any possible role for activists like you in all of this. Give yourself a bit more credit than that. And stay tuned now for handing things off to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Where could he possibly take us? Beyond it, of course, he'll be talking about Ukraine and giving his own unique spin to it, but there's much more here and around the world, and you can always count on Justice to bring those stories forward when I
From
don't.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Let's see some interesting stories here. Cuccinelli complains D.C. police are using the First Amendment as an excuse for not arresting climate change protesters. Oh, too bad. A new plan by Trump's Department of Homeland Security to finally address the right-wing violence, conveniently omitted guns. That and much, much more, as usual, up next. Stay tuned.